The hum of the city suddenly stopped. In a high-rise apartment in Buffalo, New York, a family dinner was plunged into darkness. The television went silent. The refrigerator ceased its low, constant drone. Outside, the familiar glow of streetlights vanished, replaced by an unsettling deep blackness. Car horns blared in the distance, a symphony of confusion and frustration. This wasn't a localized outage. This was something much bigger. The silence was the first sign that the intricate, invisible web of power that supports modern life had just been torn. People reached for their phones, but cell towers running on backup power were already overwhelmed. Across the state line in Detroit, Michigan, the story was the same: factory lines halted, traffic signals went dark, and hospital generators kicked in. For millions, the routine of a normal Friday evening was shattered in an instant. The simple act of flipping a switch no longer produced light, it produced nothing. The reliable flow of electricity, something taken for granted every day, had been severed, leaving a void of uncertainty. The blackout was not just an inconvenience, it was a sudden and stark reminder of vulnerability. The cause? A new electricity tariff in Canada had just been activated, and its consequences were now cascading across the border, plunging American cities into unprecedented darkness. For decades, the United States has relied on a silent, powerful partner to the north. Canada is not just a friendly neighbor, it is an energy superpower, blessed with immense rivers harnessed for hydroelectric power. This system generates a massive surplus of electricity, far more than Canada can use. That excess energy flows south, through high-voltage lines, into the U.S. states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota have become deeply integrated with the Canadian grid, relying on it especially during peak demand. On hot summer afternoons or frigid winter days, Canadian hydropower has often been the critical factor keeping the lights on. For the U.S., it's clean, affordable, and dependable. For Canada, it's a lucrative export. This cross-border energy trade has been a quiet success story, a model of international cooperation. As the U.S. transitions away from fossil fuels, Canadian hydropower has become a key part of the green energy solution, providing stable backup for wind and solar. The grid infrastructure connecting the two countries has been expanded and reinforced, but this deep dependency also created a vulnerability. The stability of the American grid became tied to decisions made in Canada. Few realized just how fragile that connection could be until now. The blackout revealed the true cost of that reliance. A tariff is essentially a tax on imported goods. In this case, the good was electricity. For years, the price of Canadian electricity sold to the U.S. was governed by long-term agreements, providing predictability. But in early 2025, the Canadian government, facing economic pressures and ambitious green energy goals, announced a new electricity export tariff. The change was abrupt and severe, doubling the price of Canadian electricity overnight. Canada argued the new price reflected the true value of their clean energy and the cost of maintaining infrastructure. The policy was designed to generate billions in new revenue, but it sent shockwaves through the U.S. energy sector. American utility companies were caught off guard. Their budgets and rates were built around the old pricing. Suddenly, a critical source of power had become prohibitively expensive. Utilities faced an impossible choice: buy the high-priced power and pass costs to consumers, or refuse and risk shortages. There was no time to build new plants or find alternatives. As demand climbed on that fateful Friday, American grid operators, seeing astronomical prices, made a fateful decision. They drastically reduced purchases, hoping to get by with domestic generation. It was a gamble. The supply gap was immediate. The blackout began. The moment American grid operators refused to pay the tariff-inflated price, the supply of electricity from Canada was throttled. The grid is a delicate balancing act. Supply must match demand every second. When Canadian power vanished, the system was suddenly out of balance. Protective measures kicked in, rolling blackouts. These controlled shutdowns rotated through neighborhoods, towns, and cities, starting near the Canadian border and spreading outward. In upstate New York, entire communities went dark. In Michigan and Minnesota, hundreds of thousands lost power. What was meant to be temporary became a prolonged crisis. As operators tried to restore power to one area, another had to be shut down. Domestic plants couldn't fill the gap. The grid became unstable, triggering more shutdowns. The impact was immediate. Water treatment plants lost power, communication networks failed, public transportation stopped. The initial controlled blackouts spiraled into a chaotic regional power crisis. The decision in Ottawa was now a dangerous reality for millions of Americans. The darkness was spreading. The grid was teetering on the edge. The crisis was no longer theoretical, it was happening. In Rochester, hospital generators roared to life but weren't built for days of use. Maria Flores scrambled for more diesel, rationing power and hoping the grid would return. In Flint, factories froze, workers idled, and owners lost money by the hour. Families like the Thompsons struggled to keep warm in powerless homes. Supermarket freezers failed, food spoiled, and gas stations couldn't pump fuel. For some, the blackout was life-threatening. The blackout exposed how fragile modern life truly is. The rolling blackouts, as disruptive as they were, meant grid operators still had some control. Their desperate measures prevented something far worse: a total grid collapse. A full collapse, a cascading failure, would have triggered a chain reaction, shutting down power stations and transmission lines across the network. Restoring power after such an event, known as a black start, is slow and complex, taking days or even weeks. During a prolonged blackout, society would grind to a halt. No water, no communication, no transportation, no financial system. Law enforcement and emergency services would be crippled. The potential for civil unrest would be immense. The blackouts in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota brought the grid dangerously close to this precipice. Operators later confirmed the system was minutes from cascading failure. Only drastic, coordinated load shedding pulled the system back from the brink. The tariff dispute had pushed North America's infrastructure to the edge of catastrophe. Energy experts had warned about this vulnerability for years. Dr. Aruna Sharma, energy policy professor at Cornell, said, "We built a system on perpetual cooperation and stable pricing. We failed to plan for a dispute." Former grid operators called it a failure of imagination. No one modeled what would happen if Canada used its energy as leverage. From Canada's side, economists defended the tariff as a necessary correction. "For too long we exported clean energy at a discount," said Jean-Pierre Dubois. The disruption in the US was, in their view, the result of American over-reliance, not Canadian policy. The conflict was a clash of national interests played out on the wires of the grid. Electricity isn't just a commodity, it's a strategic asset. The nation that controls the supply holds immense influence. The blackouts were a harsh lesson for the US. Energy security was not entirely in its own hands. The warnings had been there but went unheeded, until the lights went out. The crisis forced both countries to confront uncomfortable truths. The future of their energy relationship was now uncertain. The stakes had never been higher. In the aftermath, the first priority was de-escalation. High-level talks began between Washington and Ottawa. After 72 hours, Canada agreed to a temporary 90-day tariff suspension. Power flowed south again, stabilizing the grid. The immediate crisis was over, but the underlying problem remained. U.S. states announced emergency plans to fast-track domestic power sources, battery storage, upgraded gas plants, and even delaying shutdowns of older plants. The goal: reduced dependence on a single external supplier. Negotiations focused on a new framework for energy trade. Long-term contracts, gradual price adjustments, and dynamic pricing. Canada wanted higher base prices. The U.S. wanted predictability. Another solution: strengthen the U.S. grid by building more robust transmission lines, connecting regional grids for greater resilience. The crisis revealed the need for investment, cooperation, and a new approach to energy security. The path forward would not be easy. The September 2025 blackouts fundamentally altered the U.S.-Canada energy relationship. The era of quiet trust is over. Both sides now recognize the leverage they hold. The future depends on finding a new balance, serving Canada's economic interests and America's need for grid stability. The U.S. must negotiate a durable pact and accelerate its journey toward energy self-sufficiency. The goal isn't to sever ties, but to ensure no single point of failure can plunge millions into darkness again. Canada faces a choice: maximize short-term profit or become a reliable partner in North America's green transition. The blackouts were a painful lesson in the geopolitics of energy. The ideal future is one of renewed cooperation, where clean Canadian energy powers a stable, prosperous America. But that future isn't guaranteed. It must be built through diplomacy, investment, and a shared understanding that when it comes to power, we are all connected. The lights are back on, but the warning remains.